Welcome to Songs of Hope and Center home groups this week. Just a few announcements before we get started, and I'll try to keep these brief. Next week, after this, is Thanksgiving. We are not meeting. We are not having a meal. I know it's the fourth Thursday when we typically meet at Center. We want you to enjoy your time with family and friends, hopefully. So we are not having a video. We are not having a message at all. So the usual time that we meet and have our meal all at Center Church is going to be the following week, which is actually the fifth Thursday at 6:30 p.m. So we would love for you to join us then, but in the meantime, enjoy your Thanksgiving with friends and family the next week. A couple of other short announcements. Coming up this Sunday at Center Church, our men's group that I help lead, we are meeting after the second service at the church in the kitchen about 12:15, and we're going to meet and have pizza then. We're ordering in pizza. We're going to have a short devotional. Then we're going bowling. We did this about 6 or 8 months ago, and I think people had a lot of fun. So it's a great event for all the men to invite, for them to come, to invite the kids, grandkids, if you wanted to invite a friend to come with you. Please let me know if you're coming so we can have enough food. And it's generally about $20 a person for the bowling. And for the last announcement today is don't forget Christmas with the Grinch. That is December 2nd, Saturday here at the church in the Great Hall from 10 a.m. to about noon. And it's just a great event. We're going to have the Grinch in, and the kids will be able to get their picture taken with the Grinch, be able to make Christmas cookies, be able to eat Christmas cookies and hot chocolate, and a great family event. We hope that you'll plan on coming and telling your neighbors and friends about that as well. We hope you enjoy today's message. In today's parable, Jesus shares a parable about the talents that were distributed to 3 different people. But before that, I want to talk about just, if you've been at Center Church the last 2 or 3 weeks, you've probably seen me on stage preaching. I've been on stage playing the guitar. I've been on stage today and last week doing some drums, along with doing these recordings. Once a week, Daniel and I record these home groups. And that's all besides my full-time job. Now, along with that, I've got Pastor Dan here with me today. And I'm sure you recognize him being up here as well because he has been preaching once a week. And I'm sure there's a lot of other important stuff. No,
A few.
I joke because we're talking about talents that were given out separately, and some were given out more than others. So we're looking at Matthew 24 in here, and this emphasizes, like so many of Jesus's parables, this is about the coming back of Jesus, talking about the kingdom of heaven will be like this. And so he continues with this parable that we're going to look at today in Matthew with the same premise. So starting Matthew 25, verse 14, he goes, "For it will be like a man going on a journey, who called to his servants and entrusted them to his property. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to the other one just 1, to each according to their own ability, but then he went away." This was not uncommon for somebody in those times, a master to leave his wealth or his property with his servants to take care of while he was gone. Now, Dan, here's my first question for you today. Different commentaries I've looked up talking about talents that represent different things, like it could be a weight or a valuable coin. So if it was a gold coin, obviously it's going to be worth more than a copper or a bronze one like that. So what do you feel Jesus, when you study this or preached on this in the past, what do you feel Jesus is talking about when he's describing the talents?
I think it has everything to do with the abilities of the individuals, how they do things, the things that God has given them. Again, talents. Let's use the word talents. Talents to do. And it's not as much about the coins as it is letting people know that there is value in what they do.
It's a great way of looking at it. Going on to verse 16, I've got a lot of questions in between this parable for you. It says, "He who had received the 5 talents, well, he went away at once and traded with them, and he made 5 more talents. And so also with he who had the 2 talents, he also made 2 more. Well, but he who had received just 1 talent, he just went away and dug it in the ground and hid his master's money." So question to you here, Dan. When I was younger, I always thought that this man who had just got the 1 talent got shortchanged, right? How did he only get 1 talent where the others got 5 or 2? But he didn't foolishly, especially when he didn't foolishly waste it and do away with it. So the question is, how do you think church members, whether it's our church members or others, how do you think that they look at this first part of the parable and see how the handle or the talents were handed out? And we talk about fairness in our world, right? You hear so many people talking about, we should be treated fairly. What do you think people think about this part of it and the fair treatment we see in our society?
Well, it's always kind of hard to get in the heads of those who are in church, particularly, or maybe listening to this message. And we do live in an age that uses that word equity a lot. So when you look at somebody getting 5, somebody getting 2, somebody getting 1, then you think, well, how is that fair? But the text, if you remember, there's a little phrase in that text that says, each to his own ability.
Yep.
So that tells us, one, I believe, and the parables are always teaching a greater story than the words themselves. God knows what we are capable of. So obviously the master, if you will, or the steward in the story is representing God in the story.
Yeah.
God knows what we have done in the past. God knows what we're going to do in the present and what we're going to do in the future and how we respond to his goodness. And so, unfortunately, the man who got 1, well, he'd earned the 1 and no more than that.
And the funny thing is, even though he knew what was going to happen, he still gives us the free will to make the choices ourselves, what we do with it, right?
Exactly. That man did not know any different than those who got 2 or 5. Now, whether they talked among themselves, we can't know that. It doesn't say so in the story.
Yep.
But his actions tell us that his master, or God in the story, knew exactly what he was doing.
Great. Verse 19 says, now after a long time, the master of those servants, he came and he settled the accounts with them. And he had those who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 more, saying, he said, Master, you delivered to me the 5 talents. Here I have made 5 more. Well, in verse 21, it says, his master said to him, and I think he does this, Jesus explains this, that he would be so joyfully glad about what he did. He goes, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over just a little, so I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. Well, he who had also had the 2 talents came forward, saying the same thing. He said, Master, you delivered to me 2 talents. Here, I have 2 more to provide back to you. Well, his master said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a little, I will set you over much. Enter in the joy of your master. Then he who also had received the 1 talent came forward. And this was a little different story. He goes, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you did not scatter seed. So I was afraid. I went out and hid your talent into the ground. Here you have what is yours. But his master answered him, you wicked and slothful servant. You knew that I reap where I had not sown and gather where I did not scatter seed. Then you ought to have at least invested my money with the bankers, and at the coming I should have received what was my own with interest. So the question to you on this one, Dan. What was the biggest problem Jesus gives us for the servant who buried his talent?
Well, that's a really good question, Kyle. The biggest problem, his attitude. Because his attitude obviously is evidenced by what he did.
Yep.
And if we go with the idea that this is God who he's talking to, or at least the one who has the ability to govern his life, he's almost calling him names. To some extent.
Yep.
And it just shows that he looks at life like a glass half empty, where these other individuals seem to look at life with the glass half full. In other words, they act on what they have to try to create more. Where this man, he doesn't trust himself, and at least I think if we were to assess the story, he doesn't trust himself and projects that onto his master or God in the story.
I completely agree, but I also, did I hear you right saying that it's better to be an optimist in this story, like somebody who's full of joy and bubbles? And so I
never use the word bubbles.
It just helps to look at the life as glass half full, right?
I'm glad you're encouraged by that, Kyle.
Sorry, I got much more than that on that, but that's kind of what came to my mind first. So going on to verse 28, he goes, Jesus tells the man with the 1, he goes, so take the talent from him and give it to the one who has 10 talents. For to everyone who has been given more, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And they cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness, in that place where there be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So Dan, Why is the servant who had 1 talent and did nothing with it called worthless and cast into outer darkness?
I think the question provides the answer. He literally took what he'd been given and decided to do nothing with it. And so, I mean, it's a harsh judgment, but this is a reflection of ultimately what do we do with our life, and do we use what God gives us to benefit others and his kingdom? And this man did nothing to benefit anybody, including himself.
Kind of reminds me of where Jesus said there's a cost to follow him. And
Take up our
this guy
cross
did-
and follow him, right?
And this man did nothing to do that. He was very selfish and didn't care about what the master or God wanted him to do.
Again, I think he projected his own worldview onto God or onto this steward or the owner of the property. And well, it didn't turn out well for him.
No, did not. I like what the commentary from David Guzik says about this. He says, we can say many good things about the work of the first 2 servants that we've been talking about. They did their work promptly. They did their work with perseverance. They did their work with success, and they were ready to give an account to their master. But the 3rd servant did almost nothing with his master's money. He took some care of it that it would not be lost, but he did that by hiding it. But he did nothing positive with the master's money, and in contrast to the first 2 servants. So another question, Dan. Go back to times where you have preached this message in the past, and I don't know how recent you have, but based on the context of what it meant to the people hearing it then, those who understood it then, versus what it means to us now, what is the main message of what we are to receive? How do we put this parable into practice in our lives?
Well, I think because these individuals all received something that was not initially theirs, reiterates the idea out of Scripture that all that we have is a gift from God. Even those who don't use it or see it as from God. And so that context works today as it did in that day. Jesus always used parables. I remember that I had a college professor who actually was the president of the university that I was attending at the time, and he always liked to teach a couple classes. And he said it's important to communicate to the general public on a 4th grade level.
Yes.
Well, I bring that up because Jesus was teaching people who many of them had no opportunities for education. So the parable was right out of their life story. And as you commented in the beginning, that this was a practice that individuals would go away and kind of hand their property over at times, they would have known that. Yeah. And so, again, this idea that somehow that might not translate, what translates is they were given things from God, they used it and glorified God, these first 2. And the last one didn't acknowledge that it was from God, and he didn't acknowledge it by burying it in the story or doing nothing with it. Yeah. Thus, he received, unfortunately, his punishment in full.
Yeah. No, I think that's exactly right. And this is one of the reasons I wanted to have you come up here to explain things in a way that we all can understand. Number one, thank you for your responses to these questions. And I think this parable is so powerful because we understand better that God has blessed us with so much, all of us. And we often don't recognize it, or we take it for granted. And it's our responsibility as Christians to put that into practice, to not only use the gifts he's been given us, but also to go share our faith with others. You know, the Great Commission, tell others about Christ. And that's part of taking our abilities or our blessings and benefiting Christ. And if we don't do that, there is punishment for that. So I hope all of you got some good insight for your own life in here. I thank you, Dan, for your willingness to come up.
Yeah,
I greatly appreciate it. Have a great week.
Like and subscribe.